I'm a little embarrassed about the whole thing.
This Central Florida man says he's so humiliated he asked that we only use his middle name, George. How much would you say you've given them?
Between 250,000 and 300,000.
This is the story of a Central Florida man who thought he'd just become a multimillionaire. Instead, he was conned out of hundreds of thousands of dollars over 2 years to scammers pretending to be from Publishers Clearinghouse. On this channel, we don't just tell you what happened, we show you exactly how these scams work. The psychology, the fake documents, the moments where you'd make the same decision they did. If that sounds like something you need to understand, stay with me, because what happened to George started with something completely legitimate. About 2 years ago, George walked out to his mailbox and found a flyer inside. It was from Publishers Clearinghouse. You know the company, the one that shows up on TV with giant checks and balloons, surprising people who've won millions of dollars. Those are real. PCH is a legitimate sweepstakes company that's been around since 1953. The flyer George received was real too. A PCH spokesperson confirmed it. It had a website URL and an activation code printed on it. George did what millions of Americans do every year. He went to the website, entered the activation code, and gave PCH his contact information, his name, his phone number, his address. He was entering a legitimate sweepstakes. Nothing about this was a scam. Not yet. George wasn't desperate, he wasn't broke, he had savings, he had a life, but like most people who enter sweepstakes, he had that quiet fantasy. What would I do if I actually won? Maybe he'd retire early, maybe he'd travel, maybe he'd help family members who needed it. The flyer went in the recycling, George forgot about it. And then a few weeks later, his phone rang. The voice on the phone said they were calling from Publishers Clearinghouse. George had won $10 million in a check and $2.5 million in cash that would be delivered to him in a briefcase.
$10 million in a check and $2.5 million in cash that would be delivered to me in a briefcase.
Think about what that phone call represented. George had just entered a legitimate PCH sweepstakes weeks earlier. He'd given them his phone number, and now someone claiming to be from PCH was calling him to say he'd won. The timing wasn't coincidence. It was surgical. The scammers had obtained George's information somehow, maybe from a data breach, maybe from a lead list sold online, maybe just from public records. But they knew he'd recently engaged with Publishers Clearinghouse. They knew his name, they knew his number, and they called him at exactly the right moment, when the memory of filling out that entry form was still fresh enough to seem connected. The caller was convincing, professional. They didn't sound like a stereotypical scammer. They sounded like someone calling from a corporate office with good news. But there was a small administrative issue. Before they could deliver the $10 million check and the briefcase full of cash, George would need to wire several $100s to cover stamps on legal documents. Just a few $100s, a processing fee, standard procedure. George wired the money, and then came the next call. There were delivery fees, then insurance fees, then storage fees for the Mercedes-Benz George had also won.
I make this payment or I lose the prize.
Each fee made sense in isolation. Each amount was small enough to feel manageable compared to the $12.5 million George believed was coming. It just kept going and going and going, George said, getting deeper and deeper.
It just kept going and going and getting me deeper and deeper.
At some point, George started to question it. He asked the caller for identification, proof they were really from Publishers Clearinghouse. The scammer texted him an ID card. It showed a woman named Danielle Lamb. The card had the Publishers Clearinghouse logo. It looked official. Then they sent a photo of Danielle at work as the official PCH Prize Patrol spokeswoman. She was smiling, holding one of those giant checks PCH is famous for. What George didn't know, what he couldn't have known, is that Danielle Lamb is a real person. She really is the PCH Prize Patrol spokeswoman, and hundreds of her photos are available online for anyone to download. The scammers hadn't created fake credentials. They'd stolen real ones. This is where the scam becomes almost impossible to detect. George wasn't looking at a poorly photoshopped fake ID. He was looking at a real employee's real photo with real PCH branding. The verification he asked for verified nothing. It just deepened his trust. So George kept wiring money. Hundreds became thousands, thousands became tens of thousands. Over 2 years, George sent between $250,000 and $300,000 to the scammers. Let that number sit for a second. $300,000. Not in one payment, in small increments over 24 months. Each wire transfer felt like progress towards something enormous. The scammers understood something most people don't. You can't extract $300,000 from someone in one conversation, but you can extract it over 700 conversations. Each phone call reinforced the relationship. Each payment reinforced the investment. The psychological phenomenon is called sunk cost fallacy. The more you invest in something, the harder it becomes to walk away, even when evidence suggests you should. George wasn't being stupid, he was being human. $300,000. Gone. No check, no briefcase, no Mercedes-Benz, no prize patrol showing up at his door with balloons. George eventually realized he'd been scammed. And the shame is crushing. "I'm a little embarrassed about it," he told the news crew. He wouldn't even give his last name. He's referred to only as George throughout the entire news segment.
I'm a little embarrassed about the whole thing.
This Central Florida man says he's so humiliated he asked that we only use his middle name, George.
Think about what that means. This man lost $300,000, possibly his entire life savings, possibly money he'd worked decades to accumulate. And the thing he's most afraid of isn't the financial destruction, it's people knowing. The embarrassment is so profound that he's willing to go on camera and warn others, but only if his full identity stays hidden. The stigma of being scammed is sometimes worse than the scam itself. But George is doing something brave. He contacted News 6. He sat for an interview. He showed the fake ID cards. He explained step by step how it happened, because he knows someone else is getting this exact phone call right now. Days after George's interview aired, a News 6 viewer sent the station an email they'd received. It claimed they'd won $6.5 million from Publishers Clearinghouse. But first, they needed to pay $7,500 in legal fees. The same scam, different victim, still running. The Better Business Bureau reported that in just 1 year, nearly 200 Americans were contacted by scammers fraudulently posing as Publishers Clearinghouse. 200 reported cases. How many unreported? How many people like George who are too ashamed to come forward? Here's what makes this scam particularly insidious. It starts with something real. George entered a legitimate Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes. He gave his information to the real company. And somehow, scammers got access to that information and used it to build a fake relationship with him. The real Danielle Lamb, the actual PCH Prize Patrol spokeswoman, has addressed this directly in videos on the official Publishers Clearinghouse YouTube channel. "We never notify winners with a phone call," she says. "You never have to pay anything to claim your prize. Winning is always free at PCH."
PCH fans, it's Danielle with the PCH Prize Patrol. We never notify our winners with a phone call. You never have to pay anything to claim your PCH prize. Winning is always free at PCH.
But scammers know most people don't watch those videos. Most people don't think to verify the rules before engaging with someone claiming to be from a company they've already interacted with. The scam works because it exploits the gap between what PCH actually does and what people assume they might do. Real PCH shows up at your door with cameras. They don't call you and ask for wire transfers, but if you've never won a major prize before, and most people haven't, how would you know that? The institutional failure here isn't just about banks not stopping wire transfers, though that's part of it. It's about a system where scammers can steal the identity and branding of a legitimate company, use it to defraud hundreds of people, and face almost no consequences. Publishers Clearinghouse isn't legally liable for what scammers do with their name. The phone companies aren't liable for allowing spoofed calls. The wire transfer services process the payments exactly as instructed. Everyone followed the rules, and George lost $300,000 anyway. As of February 2026, there has been no public update on George's financial recovery or current situation. The news report from Central Florida did not include follow-up information about whether George was able to recover any portion of the $300,000 he lost, or whether any arrests were made in connection with the scam. Given that he requested anonymity and would only use his middle name, it's likely George has chosen to move forward privately rather than continue sharing his story publicly.
I just want other people to be aware that this is going on so that they don't fall in the same trap that I fell into.
If you have information about George's current status, or know of similar PCH scams happening now, this community looks out for each other. The hardest part of George's story isn't the $300,000. It's the 2 years. 2 years of phone calls. 2 years of believing the briefcase was coming. 2 years of making what seemed like small, logical decisions that accumulated into financial devastation. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a sustained psychological operation designed to extract maximum value from a trusting person. If you watched this and thought, I would never fall for that, I want you to ask yourself, would you verify the rules of a sweepstakes you'd already legitimately entered? Would you question an ID card with real photos and real logos? Would you walk away after investing $50,000 because someone told you the next payment was the last one? George did what made sense at every single step, and that's exactly why it worked. I'm Jack, this is Love or Lie. If this story made you angry or scared, or made you want to check on someone you know who enters sweepstakes, that's exactly why we tell these stories. I'll see you then.